There is a moment in the journey of souls who seek each other when everything seems to fall apart. Just when the reunion appears close, when the signs align and the energy between the two beats with greater intensity, something profound and unexpected happens. A trial emerges, a pain, a silence, a doubt. This is not a coincidence, but a cosmic demand, the final test before union. The soul is called to show its maturity, its commitment to inner truth, and its readiness to live the integration that only a twin flame reunion can bring. Nothing is accidental. The universe works in symbolic patterns, and this final test is not punishment, but an invitation to ultimate transformation. In this video, we will dive deeply into this decisive moment. If you believe you are ready to face this last test with courage, write in the comments, "I accept the challenge of my soul." Within Carl Jung's analytical psychology, the journey toward union with the twin flame reflects an archetypal process of individuation, the path of the soul toward wholeness. Jung understood that every human being carries within them unconscious aspects that must be integrated in order to achieve a more authentic and fulfilled life. And it is precisely at this point that the final test before reunion gains deep meaning. It represents the inevitable confrontation with one's own shadow. The shadow, according to Jung, is the repressed or unacknowledged part of our being. In the relationship between twin flames, this shadow reveals itself intensely through projection. Each sees in the other the aspects they have yet to recognize or accept within themselves. This mirror can be luminous but also painful. The final test, then, is nothing more than the moment when the individual is forced to face this projection and make a choice, to take responsibility for their own growth or once again escape into the ego's pattern. Furthermore, Jung spoke of the need to integrate the archetypes of animus and anima, the inner representations of the masculine and the feminine. Reunion between twin flames only becomes possible when these internal aspects are in harmony. At that point, the universe acts as a symbolic agent, arranging external events to reflect the inner state of the soul. The final test is the materialization of this dynamic. Therefore, the ultimate trial before reunion is not a barrier, but a Jungian mirror, a call to true individuation, requiring courage, surrender, and deep self-knowledge. The twin flame does not arrive to complete you, but to reflect the journey already undertaken within yourself. The journey of twin flames is profoundly symbolic, reflecting not only a narrative of love and reunion, but also a psychological call to inner wholeness. From a Jungian perspective, this path fits into the archetype of the hero's journey, a path that inevitably passes through separation, emptiness, and descent into one's own darkness. The separation of twin flames is not a mistake of destiny, but a necessary stage for individuation. Without it, there is no transformation. Without distance, there is no mirror, and without a mirror, there is no self-knowledge. Carl Jung saw individuation as the process of becoming who you truly are, a movement that integrates conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, reason and instinct. This process, however, demands ruptures. The ego, the part of the psyche with which we most identify, must be challenged, dismantled, and realigned so we can move closer to the self, the center of the psyche, and the expression of inner wholeness. The separation of twin flames represents this archetypal challenge. It is the crossing of the desert, the abandonment of the familiar, the symbolic fall that precedes ascension. Many seek in their twin flame relationship a deep sense of meaning, a spiritual reconnection, a return to origin. Yet it is precisely this expectation that must die in the stage of separation. What was hoped for in the other, salvation, completeness, healing, must be reworked within. Jung called this the withdrawal of projection, the moment we realize that what we see in the other is, in truth, a part of ourselves still unrecognized. The pain of separation is the catalyst for this withdrawal, and though it may feel destructive, it is, in fact, a disguised birth. It is here that the archetype reveals its greatest force. The inner journey requires solitude, silence, and confrontation with the unconscious. The person who experiences the separation from their twin flame is led into an unknown inner territory, where they must abandon emotional defenses, idealizations, and dependency. This is the true beginning of individuation, when one stops seeking the other as an emotional crutch and begins to build a bridge between the ego and the self. In the archetypal journey, the hero is always stripped of certainties before discovering true power. The separation of twin flames fulfills this very role. It is not merely physical or emotional distance, but a rite of passage. It is the descent into the psychic underworld, where illusions are dissolved, wounds are exposed, and the soul is invited to restructure itself. Every tear, every silence, every anguish in this period is a symbolic key, unlocking new self-understanding. Individuation, then, is not just a psychological concept, it is a real, intimate, and profound experience. And in the dynamics of twin flames, this process is amplified. The pain of absence forces the individual to look inward, to question childhood wounds, unmet needs, unconscious repetitions. What seemed like love for the other often reveals itself as a lack of love for oneself. And it is precisely here that the true journey begins, when one stops blaming the universe, fate, or the other person, and takes responsibility for their own path. Jung stated that what we deny in ourselves appears in our lives as fate. Separation is often that fate which forces us to look at what was denied: insecurity, fear of abandonment, need for control. None of this is punishment. On the contrary, all of it comes to light to be transformed. The journey of individuation is a psychic alchemy, and separation is the fire that starts the transmutation. The reunion of twin flames can only happen authentically when both have walked this path, when they realize that love for the other begins with self-acceptance, when they understand that reunion is only a reflection of the inner union achieved through effort, courage, and surrender to the process. Separation, therefore, is not the end, but sacred preparation for a love that is no longer projection, but presence. The moment before reunion is marked by a deep and inevitable psychic phenomenon, the confrontation with the shadow. This stage represents the final test imposed by the universe, not as punishment, but as a filter separating conditional love from true surrender. In Jungian language, the shadow is all that the ego rejects, hides, or refuses to admit about itself. It is the hidden side of the psyche, where traumas, fears, repressed desires, and denied aspects of identity are stored. And precisely because of this, it is also the gateway to authentic transformation. This test does not come from outside. It is an emanation of the unconscious projected onto external events to mirror what still needs to be seen. At this stage, it is common for destabilizing situations to arise. Misunderstandings, sudden distance, relapse into old patterns, encounters with childhood wounds or karmic cycles. All of this may seem unfair, painful, or confusing, but from the symbolic perspective of analytical psychology, these episodes are invitations to awareness. The universe merely organizes outer experience to reflect the inner need for growth. The shadow, by definition, is unconscious. Its contents only become visible when met with resistance, suffering, or conflict. In the twin flame bond, the other acts as a highly sensitive mirror, capable of reflecting both the light and the darkest zones of the soul. The final test is therefore the culmination of this reflection, the moment when the individual must take responsibility for their own darkness. There is no more space for victimhood, dependency, or idealization. It is time to acknowledge what was avoided, heal what was repressed, and embrace what was excluded. Carl Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This truth is at the core of the last test. The pain of this stage is not meant to destroy, but to reveal. Revelation, however, is only possible when moral judgment is abandoned in favor of sincere self-observation. It means looking at jealousy, fear of abandonment, subtle manipulations, self-sabotaging patterns, and controlling impulses without fleeing, denying, or projecting them onto the other. Everything once attributed to the twin flame, coldness, rejection, instability, begins to be seen as symbolic language of the psyche itself, crying out for integration. Overcoming this test is not linear. Often it involves repeating cycles until the central lesson is learned. The other is not the problem. The other only activates as a catalyst what already existed within. This awareness requires emotional maturity and willingness to move through pain consciously. The shadow does not vanish when seen, but when embraced. To embrace it means to accept its existence, Listen to it and understand its protective role in the psyche. Every dark aspect once arose to defend the wounded child we once were. The challenge now is to assume the role of conscious adult and re-educate that part, offering it what it never had: presence, truth, and acceptance. This is the turning point. When the shadow is recognized and reintegrated, the energetic field between twin flames changes. The heavy emotional charge begins to dissolve, power games lose strength, emotional dependence gives way to mutual respect. Love then vibrates at another level, no longer as a need for fulfillment, but as an expression of inner wholeness. At this stage, union ceases to be an external goal and becomes a natural reflection of internal balance. The final test, then, is not something to be conquered, but to be crossed. It is a symbolic passage between ignorance and self-knowledge, between projection and integration, between lack and real love. Jung did not see the shadow as negative, but as a portal to the soul. And it is precisely through this portal that true reunion between twin flames becomes possible. When both face their own darkness with courage, what remains is light. Not idealized light, but the serene clarity of those who know how to love with awareness and presence. The dynamic between twin flames is one of the most intense forms of psychic mirroring a human being can experience. When two souls meet at this level of connection, a deep activation of unconscious contents occurs for both individuals. It is as if the other begins to carry, symbolically, everything that is hidden, repressed, or unresolved within us. This process is described by Jung as projection, the psychological mechanism by which we attribute to another the feelings, traits, or impulses we do not recognize in ourselves. And within this unconscious movement, illusion is born, but also the opportunity for healing. At first, this projection can be enchanting. The other seems ideal, a reflection of the soul, an extension of what we most desire or lack. The twin flame becomes the holder of our deepest yearnings: safety, recognition, belonging, transcendence. But as the bond deepens, the projection begins to reverse. The same mirror that once reflected beauty and harmony begins to reveal pain, fear, rejection, frustration. What once was light becomes shadow, and it is at this point that rupture occurs. The rupture between twin flames is almost inevitable, for it marks the moment when projections can no longer be sustained. The ego, wounded by the frustration of not finding perfection in the other, reacts with pain, anger, or withdrawal. Yet instead of being seen as failure, this rupture must be understood as the beginning of disidentification with illusion. The other, once seen as everything, is revealed as a real being, imperfect, human, equally burdened with shadows and dilemmas. This shock with reality is necessary for individuation to begin. Jung emphasized that projection is natural, but must eventually be withdrawn for psychic growth to occur. The pain that arises when we realize the other does not match our idealizations is in truth an invitation to look inward and ask, why did I expect this from them? What does this expectation say about me? What have I yet to integrate within myself? These questions mark the beginning of an inner movement that transforms pain into a tool for self-knowledge. In the context of twin flames, the rupture caused by the collapse of projections is the symbolic space where the true work begins. Each hurt, each abandonment, each silence, each distance serves as a trigger pointing to an earlier wound. And these wounds almost always have roots in childhood or formative experiences of identity. The other is not the cause of the suffering, but the catalyst that reactivates what remains unresolved. The pain does not come from the present, but from the past still alive in the psyche. In this sense, the twin flame becomes the mirror of both pain and desire. They reflect what we want but never had, what we fear to lose, what we believe we do not deserve. And this is why the connection is so intense. It is not only about the other, but about the part of us longing to be seen, embraced, and loved. The universe, in this process, orchestrates a perfect dance between the two, creating the exact situations for these projections to surface and be dissolved. Breaking the illusion of projection is painful, but also liberating. When we stop expecting the other to save us, complete us, or understand us without words, we create space for the true encounter, one between two beings who are self-aware, whole in their imperfection, and willing to love responsibly. Projection creates dependence, but awareness creates freedom. And it is this freedom that prepares the ground for true reunion between twin flames, no longer as distorted reflections of one another, but as full expressions of themselves. The rupture, then, is not the end of love, but the end of illusion. It is the moment when the relationship ceases to be a projection field and becomes a mirror of truth. A mirror that not only reveals wounds, but also hidden potential, forgotten gifts, and the capacity to love with maturity. The pain of loss in this context is initiation into reconnection with the soul. And the other, far from being enemy or savior, is recognized as a teacher, the one who, by reflecting our shadows, guides us back to the light. Before true and lasting reunion can occur, a fundamental inner process must take place: the integration of the feminine and masculine principles within the psyche. For Jung, these principles are represented by the archetypes of anima and animus. The anima symbolizes the unconscious feminine in man, the animus, the unconscious masculine in woman. These archetypes are not tied to biological gender, but to the energetic and symbolic polarity within every human being. Integrating them means recognizing, accepting, and harmonizing these inner forces, and this integration is a prerequisite for any union rooted in maturity, awareness, and truth. In the twin flame experience, the other often embodies the archetype furthest from our conscious awareness. The woman sees in her partner strength, direction, security, and discernment she has yet to integrate. The man projects onto his partner intuition, sensitivity, surrender, and mystery he has not yet recognized in himself. This initial projection creates a magnetic, intense bond, but also symbolic dependence. The other seems essential, as if without them something fundamental is missing. And indeed, something is missing, but not in the other. It is missing within. The universe, by creating separation or the final test before reunion, points directly to this archetypal lack. It reveals that what the individual desperately seeks outside must be developed and integrated inside. If the woman feels she can only be complete beside her embodied animus, she is invited to discover her own strength, clarity, and action in the world. If the man feels he only finds peace and meaning in the presence of his anima, he is called to dive into his own soul, listen to his intuition, and cultivate his sensitivity. This journey is solitary, but sacred. Jung saw anima and animus as bridges to the self, the unifying center of the psyche. When these principles are out of balance, the ego remains fragmented, projecting its inner gaps onto the outer world. But when integration occurs, a new way of being emerges, more complete, freer, more conscious. The woman who integrates her animus becomes firm without losing softness. The man who integrates his anima becomes sensitive without losing presence. And when two souls who have completed this inner work meet, the love that arises is no longer one of need, but of abundance. It is common during this integration process for the twin flame to disappear temporarily from the other's life. This distance is not abandonment, but a symbolic space necessary for each to rediscover their own essence without the distortion of projection. The absence of the other allows the self to meet itself, and in this self-reunion, the archetypes begin to rebalance. What once seemed impossible to access within, courage, gentleness, assertiveness, empathy, begins to emerge naturally, like a blooming, long-awaiting, fertile ground. Integrating anima and animus also requires revisiting unconscious models we inherited about the masculine and feminine. Often what we project onto the other is not only a universal archetype, but also a distorted ideal shaped by trauma, absence, or family conditioning. The final test before reunion confronts these inner images harshly. If you always expected the other to fix your life, this pattern will be broken. If you always made yourself dependent on the other to feel useful, this habit will be challenged. Anything misaligned with your essence will be exposed. This process can be confusing and even painful, for it forces us to let go of the romantic fantasy that the other will rescue us. But it is precisely the dismantling of this illusion that opens space for truth. And the truth is that union with a twin flame only happens when both have fully met themselves. Only when each has learned to be whole alone can they truly share this wholeness with the other, without demands, without games, without hidden needs. The integration of anima and animus is therefore the final portal before reunion. It transforms the relationship into something spiritual yet profoundly human. It is not about perfection, but about awareness. Not about control, but about surrender. And once this point is reached, reunion ceases to be an obsession and becomes a natural consequence of a psychic journey that honored every stage. Love, then, is no longer a desire, but a state. And in this state, reunion is not just possible, it is inevitable. The journey of twin flames is not an easy path. It requires detachment, courage, and a deep dive into the unconscious. What many see as a romantic relationship is, in truth, a powerful tool of psychic transformation. Separation, the final test, projection, the shadow, and the integration of inner principles are symbolic phases guiding each individual back to reunion with themselves. Only after this crossing can the true reunion occur, not as a fairy tale, but as the manifestation of two souls who chose to become whole before uniting. This journey is not for the impatient. It is for those willing to grow, to heal, and to love without conditions. The universe does not test out of cruelty, but out of wisdom. It wants to be sure you are ready to sustain a love not built on lack, but on completeness. If this content touched your soul, subscribe to the channel, share this video with others on the same path, and click on the video now appearing on the screen. It may be the next step in your awakening process. Your transformation begins when you choose to look within. See you in the next dive.